Imagine a world where men stepped up and answered God's call to reach their full potential. Imagine a world where men put their faith and trust in God unwaveringly and without qualification. Imagine a world where men lived out God's purpose for them in everything they do. It's Not My Credit to Take explores the awe and wonder of how God shows up in the lives of strong, principled Christian men from all walks of life. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be transformed. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, faithful husband, loving father, loyal friend, and unapologetically Christian. Welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Jeremy, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great.
For those who aren't watching on YouTube, Jeremy has an outstanding shirt. It says God is good like a dozen times on it, and no truer words have been printed on a t-shirt, Jeremy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
My guest today is Jeremy Kalakosky. Jeremy is an HVAC installation technician. He works for Benefit Air. Now, anyone outside of the state of Arizona probably doesn't really know that this time of year, Jeremy's job is getting ready to ramp up in earnest, because we're about a month away from not only triple digits but into the one teens. And the whole thing, Jeremy, I came from the Midwest, and I had adopted the idea of there being it's just a dry heat. It's hot, man. It's just brutal. But Jeremy's an avid reader. He's actually working through the Little House on the Prairie series. Got that done. He's involved in anything outdoors, hiking, running, things like that. And at home, Jeremy's married to his wonderful wife of 7 years, Elisa, and the two of them have 5 kids. Jeremy, welcome to It's Not My Credit to Take.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here today.
It's great to have you. Before we start, I just want to let you know that, like most of us, you married up. You absolutely married up. I had the opportunity to work with Elisa and the organization that she works for, and she is an absolutely brilliant person that has nothing but, really, as far as I'm concerned, an endless runway for growth and development with her current organization. So good for you on picking her.
Well, thank you. She is a blessing to my life.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are in your life today.
Where do I begin? You know what I mean? It's as I look back, I can see God in my life from when I was a child. I was born here in Phoenix, and I don't remember much about it. I remember being here. I remember it being hot. I think we were here on the day 1990 when it was 122 degrees. And my mom had me out we were taking the buses, and I just remember it being hot, I've met my father a couple times, but I never knew him. Like, he wasn't in my life. You know what I mean? I think I met him when I was 2. I remember meeting him when I was 7. And then that was the last time I ever saw him, so I didn't have a father figure in my life. My mother was, she was handicapped, kind of more of a intellectual handicapped. She couldn't see that good, and it was almost like she was like a teenager or my sister, opposed to being my mother, having that strong motherly figure. But I did have grandparents, so I was raised by my grandparents. I had a good grandma and grandpa. My grandmother was a beautician. My grandfather was a heavy machine operator, and they were always in my life to give me stability. And I was born here in Phoenix, but I was raised in the Pacific Northwest, a little town called Marysville, which is like maybe 45 minutes north of Seattle. And I was pretty much raised there till I was 18, and played sports as much as I could. Rode bikes, was gone all day, cartoons. I played Nintendo a lot. But, I always felt kind of awkward as a kid, little chubby, just, trying to fit in, doing the negative things for attention. And, for the most part, I had a good childhood. Like, when I think back to my childhood, I think it was great, perfectly normal. But now that I became an adult and started like doing some work on myself, I realized that, it was good, like nothing physically or sexually happened, but it was still kind of, what's the word? Dysfunctional. It was dysfunction. And that kind of shows up today in how I raise my kids. So I had to start doing work on that. Um, but my mom was a Christian, and she brought me to church a lot. And I remember, I think I was 7 or 8, and I was in this program called the Royal Rangers, which is almost like a little program they have, I think, in the Pentecostal church. And I remember, accepting Christ in my life at that age. And I just remember feeling the overwhelming presence and joy that came with that. Like there was substance to it, and that stuck with me. So I didn't live for Christ my whole life, but I remember accepting Him at that young age. Um, and from there, it just, it really, around my teenage years, things started to really go downhill. I started drinking, and the first time I drank, that awkwardness that I had went away, the fear that I was consumed with, the anxiety, it went away. It was almost like a solution to that. And so I started to chase that anytime I could. This is like 7th grade. I remember getting my 7th grade yearbook, being drunk at my house reading the yearbook, you know what I mean? And it was just off from there, marijuana. They put me on ADHD meds at like 13 years old. Um, at first, I didn't like them because I don't really think I had severe ADHD enough to call for meds. I was just a boy that the school district didn't know how to handle. My mom didn't know how to handle. And the Ritalin, that it was just so strong that it did calm me down, but the effects of that was a really addiction. You know what I mean? Because it went from the Ritalin, they put me on Adderall. And I remembered when I was taking the Adderall, it was like 7th, 8th grade. And then I started to take it because I was bored. My mom moved me to a smaller town, little town called Arlington, and I would get bored and take these Adderall pills that would take the boredom away, give them to my friends. And I remember when I used to go to the pharmacy to pick up the prescription, it didn't say Adderall on the bottle, it said amphetamine salt. And I was like, what's amphetamine? So I started typing it up, and methamphetamine/amphetamine. You know what I mean? It's right there. The only difference between methamphetamine is it's made on the street. Amphetamines are made in like the pharmaceuticals. So I got addicted to amphetamines at a real young age, and with that came, pornography. I just needed that. That was my okay. You know what I mean? That's how I got by. That's how I dealt with anything. And I didn't even know. By the time I realized I was addicted, it was too late. There's nothing I could do. So pretty much my teenage years were just, partying, sex before marriage, just pretty much anything you could think of, I pretty much did, and I didn't care about anything. Lived with my grandparents at this time, and I mean, and God was there throughout the whole time, but I wasn't living for Him. I wasn't living that way. He was more of the foxhole prayers, when I'd gotten too high, or when I used to take too many pills and watch my heart beat out of my chest because it literally moved my shirt. I would pray, when I felt like, they call it the amphetamine psychosis, but sometimes it feels really spiritual. It could feel almost like an evil presence is with you, and it won't give you any rest. And I would pray then. And so that was pretty much my teenage years, and when I turned 18, my whole family, my grandparents and my mom moved to Kingman, Arizona, because my grandmother was born in Kingman, and she traveled throughout all Arizona. Her stepfather, back in the 50s, maybe he was on a crew that built the Highway 93 from Kingman to Phoenix. So they were building that road. So she lived in Kingman, Yarnell, like all the Mare, all those towns that were associated with that road. And so she moved to Kingman, and at 18 years old, I moved with them. And I was trying to get my life right there. And I mean, by trying to get my life right, I mean, I just wasn't going to use meth anymore. That was getting my life right. I was still going to drink, and I get to Kingman, and we get established, and I start working because I'm only 18 at this time. And it was always okay to drink. My grandfather was like, if you work, you can drink. That was the motto. You know what I mean? That was a lot of people's motto. You work, you drink, And my grandfather would always say, why don't you just have one or two? And I never wanted one or two. One or two didn't do anything. I wanted like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. Usually 8 was the lucky number. When you had about 8 beers, you got dizzy and went to bed. You know what I mean? So I would work, and I was new to Arizona because coming from the Pacific Northwest, it rained all the time, and
Yeah.
and so I would got to Arizona and there's pools and it's warm, so I'd get off work after working outside all day, and literally get like a 12-pack, dump it in the pool because the beer cans would float around in the pool, and I would just drink up. It was wonderful, and it lasted for about 4 months until that monkey on my back started, knocking, and I started pursuing methamphetamine in Arizona. And for the next 3 years, it was just chaos. Just chaos. Like my family pretty much disowned me. Started going to jail, and I was just chasing it with everything I had. A lot of spiritual stuff going on, and it's just I don't know. I was lost. I was really lost. And
Throughout this time, Jeremy, were you still sensing the evil presence in your
yeah,
life? So when you say spiritual at this point in your life, that's what you're specifically referencing, or did you also sense God's presence?
I would sense God's presence, but there was so much guilt and shame that I had from the decisions that I was making that it was, so during this time period, it was almost like, because I'm either in it or I'm not, you know what I mean? And so when I would get the moments of clarity and I would come to God, it was almost like I wasn't ready or I wasn't able to fully commit to Him, so I would run away.
Hmm.
If that makes any sense. I would run, because I didn't want to give up my lifestyle yet, or I wasn't able to, you know what I mean? Um, and in the evil present, whenever I was on that drug, there was always a dark shadow. You know what I mean? And a lot of people describe it, like the people that, it can be called the amphetamine psychosis, which is almost like a paranoid schizophrenic state. But when you're in the middle of it, it feels a little more than that. It almost feels like, like a demonic is there. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to describe. But I would always turn to God in those moments.
Now, was it the continuation of the Adderall, or did you transition into crystal meth?
Crystal meth. I
Crystal meth.
forgot to say that. At 18 years old, they canceled my Adderall prescription. So from the age of 18 and on, it was crystal meth.
Got it. I came across some statistics that just are over the top alarming, and that according to the National Institute of Health, only 5% of crystal meth users find sobriety greater than 3 years without rehabilitation or treatment.
Right.
And within the total population, 92% of crystal meth users relapse at least once in their recovery efforts. I've never tried crystal meth. I've actually tried Adderall once, and I didn't like how that made me feel. It's like it was interesting. My thoughts were 3 paragraphs faster than my tongue. And I just like, no, I don't prefer this. From your perspective, why do you think, or maybe you know this based on your own recovery, why is it so difficult to break the cycle?
It's a really habit forming drug, and I think a lot of it has to do with the brain chemistry and the dopamine. Because a drug like Adderall and amphetamines really forces the dopamine to be released in your brain, and when the dopamine's released, it's the euphoria, it's the good feeling you get, and then once it stops, when it shuts it off, I think it keeps it shut off for longer, and then the normal day to day things just don't give you pleasure anymore. And so you're really chasing after something that's going to give you pleasure, just in your well being.
Gotcha. So, in the work that you said you've done on yourself, how much of your starting drinking as a teenager, sort of gravitating towards marijuana and later methamphetamine, how much of that do you think is connected back to being raised without a father?
I didn't. My grandfather was there, but and I was just thinking this. I didn't chase after my grandfather like I would have a father. You know what I mean? And he was there for me. It wasn't his doing that did that. It was mine. But I think a lot of it could be traced back to that. Not having that father figure in my life every day to guide me or even correct me when I was on the wrong path. Having him not there just kind of left it up to me to make these decisions. And I was influenced by people that probably weren't the best for me, and it just once it started, it was almost too late. So I would say a great deal.
Yeah. So you found yourself in your mid-20s, and you're addicted to crystal meth, and now you started having legal issues. What were those like? What did those consist of?
Um, so most of all my legal issues have been some sort of intoxication or drug related offenses. It'd be like, me and my girlfriend be at my mom's house, and we get loud with each other, and the cops would get called, and they call that domestic violence. Being caught with paraphernalia like a pipe, go to jail for that. Getting violent when you're coming down or drunk, harassment, just stuff like that. You know what I mean? A lot of criminal damage, breaking stuff. That was what happened in Kingman in my 20s. And I would go to jail, get clarity, and get out. Tell myself I'm not going to do that again, and then I'd be back on it. Usually within about a minute.
Within about a week. So now, fast forward to the last 7-ish years, maybe 7 to 10 years. What was it that was finally the moment where you're just like, okay, my life is not going in any direction that I want it to go, and it seemingly is like Groundhog Day. What was it for you that was the impetus to turn it around?
Well, I think it was 2010, and my mom, we're all back in Phoenix. My grandparents live in Sun City. My mom was living in Glendale, and I was living with my mom. I think at 26 years old, and I was kind of like a daily user and an alcoholic. I would drink. I would drink in the day. I would use meth in the day, and then I had to go to Fry's, the grocery store, because they stopped selling alcohol. They stopped selling liquor at 2. I would have to go get a bottle of liquor about 1:55, and I would have to drink that to get me through the night, or else I'd get paranoid by using just the meth by itself. So that would taper me through the night, and then I'd stay awake all night. Then in the morning, get meth again. So it was like staying up 3-4 days, sleeping a day, staying up 3-4 days, sleeping a day, and I was just kind of like a walking zombie, just out of my mind and just living for this drug, not going anywhere. And I ended up committing an assault in front of my house, and I assaulted this man, and I went to jail, and they let me out. And then about 2 months later, this is all 2010. About 2, 3 months later, I got caught with meth, went to jail. They let me out, and then about 2, 3 months later, I had taken my mom's debit card and went and got like cigarettes, and I got intoxicated and didn't come back. Then I got arrested again all in the same year. And from that point, I got sentenced to the Department of Corrections for the first time. And I got sentenced to 2.5 years.
Hmm.
When I first went in, I was kind of out of my mind. I went to the psych ward, which I really didn't need to go, but I had drugs on me and I didn't want to do them with anyone else. So I told them I wanted to hurt myself, so that way they put me in a room by myself.
Hmm.
And then once I did that, I did the drugs and realized I was stuck in this room. So I had to be taken to the psychiatric ward of the lower Buckeye jail. And in there, I just hit my knees and I prayed. And I'm like, I can't keep doing this. I'm going to die. And from that point on, I went to the general population, and I just started I got a Bible, and I really developed like a knowledge to really read the Bible. And I just started doing that every day. And that started really giving me clarity and peace. And I started joining the prayer groups, and like we would pray every night and have like a Bible study. And I started going to 12-step meetings. And when I got to prison, that's all I did was just, get into the Word, Bible studies, church, 12-step meetings, and I stayed sober throughout that time. They were offering an associate's degree in pastoral ministries, and I did that, and just soaked up the Word and soaked up all that as much as I could. And then I got out in 2000. I got out of prison in 2013 in January, and I didn't like, the Bible and having all the knowledge of the Bible and having a relationship with God. That was great for my spiritual side, but I didn't know how to live sober because they didn't teach me how to live sober. You know what I mean? Like to have the tools to do that. I mean, they're in there, but unless you really know how to pull them out, you know what I mean? And so for an addict like me, I would use and drink when I was happy. When I was joyful, that was a real good reason to, not joyful. When I was like peace and content, things were good and the sun was shining, that was a good reason to go get loaded, And so when I first got out of prison, I drank again. And that kind of led me on like a 6-month run. Like my grandfather died, I was his caretaker, and I just didn't know how to put all the pieces together. And then in July 2013, I went to rehab. And when I went to rehab, that's when I got introduced to like Alcoholics Anonymous and Crystal Meth Anonymous. And I got a sponsor and I started working the steps. And then I went to a sober living house, which helped me to learn to live sober. And that's when I really changed it over. So I went into the rehab July 10th, 2013, and I haven't had anything since.
Good for you. That's outstanding. At any point since then, actually, let me back up just a sec. So within that 6-month period after getting out of prison before going to rehab, did your faith in God waver in thinking like, I just can't do this, even though I'm more connected with Jesus than I've ever been in my life?
It didn't so much waver, but I had the guilt and shame came back again because I developed such a close relationship with him in prison, and I knew he'd kept me safe, and I knew that he started blessing me in all these ways that when I went back to it, it almost felt like the protection that I had from him was off. You know what I mean? It was like, I know I was saved. I know I was secure in my salvation. I was secure in him, but I felt like that hedge of protection that he was protecting me with had left. And it was kind of like I was left to my own devices for a little time being. You know what I mean? And it kind of let in the influence of the enemy. I would try to read the Bible, and it would just like, instead of bringing peace, it would bring guilt. It wouldn't bring what it was doing. And I mean, before that too, I remember being real intoxicated before and trying to read the Bible, and it was almost like the enemy didn't want me to read it, and the words would kind of scramble, and it would just bring so much fear that I would just stop. It was like it didn't want me reading that. But yeah, no, I felt guilty, like I'd abandoned him. You know what I mean, and chose the other way. And yeah.
So you felt like you abandoned him rather than he abandoning you.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we're 2013 or so at this point, and had you met your wife by now? Yeah. And so because you've been married 7 years, so that is what, roughly 2015, 2016. And in my conversation, one of the recent conversations I had with her, we both disclosed that we were Christian, and it changed the course of the entire conversation. How has your wife, or maybe more broadly, how has being a husband and a father impacted and or strengthened your walk with Christ?
I mean, I have to rely on him for everything. Everything that's good comes from him. The learning how to be a father, I go to him. I go to his word. I got to pray for insight, for wisdom. So in being in church, being around other godly men to do this, because I don't have the capacity, to do it on my own. And he's also put a lot of godly men in my life to guide me. I'm involved in like the AA program, sponsorship. I'm sponsored. I help other men through the steps so they can get sober. We go speak at rehabs. I take a meeting into a hospital detox, and I'm involved in a large men's group called the Knights, and they're not AA, but they're like a lineage meeting, and it's really big. But I mean, without all that, I wouldn't be the man I am today. You know what I mean? I'd just be kind of left to not having the good examples.
One of the things that has struck me personally in the recent past is being called to it's not my credit to take. And over the last couple of months, people have referred to it as a ministry. And I didn't set out to start a ministry. I'm like, who the heck am I? And I can only assume that, when that most of us feel similarly, and that we go through some degree of imposter syndrome and wondering whether or not we're worthy to accept the calling and then do right by that. At any point in becoming a sponsor, did you go through something akin to imposter syndrome, wondering as to, my gosh, I'm so broken, how can I possibly help anybody else?
Yeah. I mean, that happens. Those thoughts come in. And I mean, really, the first couple of times you do it, you're just, they say the point of sponsoring people isn't so much that they get sober, but it helps you to stay sober. If that makes any sense. Like, you're out there and you're carrying the message to them, and somehow that helps keep you sober. There's principles in AA that's just, people have 40, 50 years from this, and it's just like a key to the sobriety is you have to give it away. And it's worked in many other people's life. But yeah, sometimes it's like, sometimes you could say it's like going through the motions, but when you go to sit down with these people and you start sharing your experience with them, sometimes you find you're just giving them great advice and you don't know where it's coming from. It's just, I would say it's God, it's just coming out of your mouth and you're helping them. And it's almost like too, that saying, I don't know if it's a saying, but they say, like, I can help give you advice, but I'm sometimes I can't take it. You know what I mean? Like, I can give it to you and tell you what to do and tell you how to do it.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, kind of like, you know what I mean? You can give the advice, but it's a mystery, of how that works, but it does. It's proven in a lot of men's lives that I know.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were describing that, as I've been a professional teacher in higher education for the last 8 years, and one of the things that dawns on you right away is that whenever you teach the material, you are simultaneously the most active student in that moment. And I didn't know what to expect, but I found that surprising, and it sounds like that is it parallels what you're describing with being a sponsor. So how are you able to integrate your faith within your work, or is that something that you just don't go anywhere? You don't want to touch. You don't want to go anywhere near, because it's such a sensitive topic. We really need to be ultra conservative and make sure we don't step on anyone's toes. How do you go about doing that, if at all?
It's funny that the company I work for, the owner is a Christian, and like 80% of the people there are Christians, and our clientele base, like 80% of them are Christians. So a lot of, like, we were going to this church at one point called Open Door Fellowship, and it seems like a lot of our customers were coming from there, and then just word of mouth. And then they had a radio advertisement. And it's just really, like, most of our clients were Christians, so it was a really nice clientele base. And so we would talk about it. Not all of them, but most of them were. And so I was able, and even my coworkers were, so it's always been a place where we would talk about it a lot all day and just glorify God while we're working, So I was really blessed with that area to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I haven't worked for a secular organization for a number of years, and I can't imagine going back into that world and not having the freedom and flexibility to be able to talk about it. And even though, you know, even though that's, that's really the culture. And speaking of culture, I think it's fairly obvious, especially to Christians, that there is a desperate need to help men, particularly young men, answer God's call of their potential. There's almost this either active or passive acceptance of listlessness and aimlessness within the lives of men, most notably young men. What advice could you give a listener on how we navigate, both as a Christian, how do we help people navigate these cultural dynamics? Or if there's a listener that is struggling to really sort of get through the confusion on what it means to be a man in 2023, what would you say?
I mean, I really hold to the old school values, and that's a hard question for me because I've been a Christian for so long, like most of my life, that most of my values and everything has come from some sort of Christian men. Um, and so I can't really imagine, it's hard for me to imagine not having God in my life and that peace that he brings. You know, to have God is to have peace, and to be able to navigate those hard things and to have someone to bring it to. Um, that's such a hard question, and I think about that a lot too. I would, you gotta go after the thing that brings you the peace, And as far as the values today, I mean, I think the value of being in our children's lives, showing up in our kids' lives, and showing up in your marriage is, a lot of that's almost in the media's eyes and other things countercultural. You know what I mean? Like to be a man that shows up, that provides and is there for his kids. Those are all good virtues to have. In a world that is saying that that's not, in a world that's almost against the family. But you gotta have, in my opinion, God is what helps me navigate that. And having other men to look up to.
So you reference being a provider. Whenever I think about what it means to be a man, I add protector onto it too. Yesterday, my wife and girls took a self-defense class, and the instructor leading it is our karate sensei, and he was really, really clear as he was demonstrating some moves that we actually want to do the opposite of what our instinct would be, where we actually want to get closer to whoever may be trying to hurt us. Because the last thing a woman wants, or even a young girl wants, is to actually be struck by a man. And you and I get that, why he would say such a thing. If for no other reason, it's absolutely the case. And yet our society is led to believe that women are equal in every area, and they're just not. They're certainly equally, if not more smart than we are. They're certainly more emotionally intelligent than we are. But in terms of the physical aspect, we're just different. And yet there's this pursuit towards sort of leveling everything out. Where do you think that comes from? Do you believe we're living in a period of spiritual warfare? Do you believe we're approaching end times? What's your general sense on what we're seeing out in society?
I believe there's nothing new under the sun. And I mean, if you look back to the Roman Empire, to the Greek Empire, to all the empires, I mean, we're just following in their footsteps. That's happened before. What is truth? 2 + 2 = 4. And those are just things. I heard this thing the other day, when it's like, when 2 + 2 = 4 is wrong, that's when you're in trouble. It's just,
Right.
Yeah. I totally get where you're coming from. I mean, I believe that men and women were created different. The man is more physically stronger, bigger boned, and that's what makes us different. You know what I mean? We should be protectors. And I think it's all funneling into the end times. I think that's what it all is. I think, the enemy has a big hold on this world right now, big time. And I think it's all supposed to happen. It's supposed to go the way it's supposed to go. And the hard part is where do we as Christians, fit into that fight? You know what I mean? As if it's all supposed to happen anyway, and it's supposed to align in a certain way to meet the end times. I mean, it's really hard. You know what I mean? Because I'm not on social media blasting stuff. You know what I mean? My fight will be more in the day-to-day conversation, and not even a fight. Like I'll give, if someone wants to have a conversation about it, we can talk about it. But as far as like, going on social media and arguing and posting stuff, I'm not really into that, because it just, Paul says, what's the point of these arguments? You know what I mean? Be a peacemaker, and I try to lead with love and hear the other person's side, but at the same time, speak up for truth. Because nowadays there's just so much stuff. It's just one thing after the other, and it just piles up. It's like you just want to pull your kid out of the public school, and yeah, it's kind of chaotic, almost chaotic to the point that it's comical. It's just, when you watch the news, it's just one thing after the other, and I'm like, I don't even know where to begin anymore. I just got to keep my faith in God and know that He has a plan, and we're going somewhere,
Yeah, you referenced earlier in the conversation about living in Washington. I don't know if you happen to see it. I saw it yesterday where the Washington State Legislature passed a bill that allows for children to be taken away from their parents if their parents refuse gender expansion or gender, affirmation. I can't remember. I don't know the exact terminology, but basically, if they refuse what would ultimately be hormones and or surgery, they can remove the child from the household. And that just absolutely eludes me, because it's viewed as a type of abuse where you would need to call social services in to remove the child by the parents making a parental decision. It's just backwards on so many levels.
And on the opposite side of that, I think for one, that's government overreach.
No doubt.
The other thing is I think that any parent that would try to change their child's sex that's under the age of 18, that's child abuse, and they should be put in jail. You know what I mean? That's strictly child abuse.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
There's no other way to go with that.
Yeah. So what's next for you in the next phase of your life?
I'm just, life is exciting right now. Just raising the kids. I think I might try to get into commercial HVAC, get with a big company, get into commercial HVAC, and just see where it goes from there, and just try to climb the ladder, and see if I still want to do HVAC, because it's kind of a hard job. It's hot out, so we'll see how far I can go with that, and just chase God every day, try to be a good father. I've been doing some things, like I got my passport the other day, and I'm in the process of getting all my rights restored and getting my gun rights back. So that's exciting. I'm getting all the verdicts of my felonies set aside, hopefully, and then we'll just go from there. And it's just, God has just been such a blessing in my life.
That's wonderful. Well, for what it's worth, your wife speaks extraordinarily highly of you. And not only with how far you've come, but how you show up, not only in her life, but in the lives of your kids. So I commend you for that. That's absolutely outstanding. Very impressive.
Thank you.
As usual, and when we near the end of this conversation, I tend to put my guests on the spot and ask if you feel comfortable closing us out with prayer.
Sure, I can do that.
Wonderful.
All right. Dear Lord, thank you for this opportunity to come and share today. I pray for this ministry that it reaches men's hearts, that it reaches the people it's supposed to get to. I pray for our world. I pray for our country, and we just give it to you, Lord. Whatever you would have us do. Come back soon. And I just thank you for this opportunity. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Jeremy, thank you so much again for taking time today. You have a remarkable story, and I absolutely know you have a remarkable future ahead of you. So God bless.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You can contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.